Thanks for watching this video from the Bible Fulfilled. My name's Alex Polyak. I am the director of the Bible Fulfilled, and today I'm going to be talking about Revelation 21 verse 1, which says that there would be no more sea in the new heaven and earth. Here's what John said, and by the way, John's the writer of this passage, or the book of Revelation, the whole book actually. But here's what he said in Revelation 21 verse 1. Now I saw new heaven and earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no more sea. So many Christians believe that this passage is teaching that one day there will be a world without oceans, basically. But is that really what this passage is referring to? I don't think so. The book of Revelation is filled with, signs and symbols that represent spiritual realities. And I think that's what's going on here too. There are different views of what this no more sea refers to, so that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. And by the way, there may be some truth to more than one of these views that I show. I think that probably is the case. Okay, so let me go over these different views. The first one is that the sea represents the sinful world. In the Old Covenant, or in the Old Testament, the raging sea served as a symbol of a rebellious and restless world filled with sin. For example, Isaiah 17 verse 12 to 13 says, "The wicked are like a troubled sea when it cannot rest, whose waters cast up mire and dirt. There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked." So Isaiah portrays the wicked as a troubled sea. We've all heard the saying, "There's no rest for the wicked." This is where it comes from. People that are straddled with sin have no rest. They're like the raging sea. But Jesus has overcome sin. So those who put their faith in him now have rest. In other words, in Christ, there is no more sea. So that's one possibility about what this no more sea refers to. It refers to what Christ did. He overcame sin, and thus there is no more sea for those who, put their faith in Christ. That's one possibility. Now, the second possibility, and this is the one I lean towards, is that the sea refers to Gentiles. In Old Testament times, Gentiles were often compared to turbulent waters. They're compared to like the sea and rivers and rushing waters. For example, Isaiah 8 verse 7 portrays the king of Assyria as, quote, "the waters of the river strong and mighty." Daniel 7 also describes 4 beasts coming out of the sea, to devour Israel. Most scholars say that these beasts represent the Gentile empires of the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. In fact, the last of these sea beasts, the Roman Empire, was still around when Revelation was written in approximately the year 8065. And why were these Gentiles portrayed as raging waters? Because they did not know God, and as a result, they were unstable, inconsistent, unpredictable, and restless, just like the sea. On the other hand, Israel, when Israel was obeying God, was steady and stable like land. So when Revelation speaks of no more sea, it's referring to Gentiles around the world coming to Israel's God and becoming like land, as it were, until there was no more sea. Jesus said something about this too in Matthew 13, verse 47 to 48. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a net that was cast into the sea to gather fish of every kind." This is a reference to Gentiles being gathered into the kingdom. Here's something else that's interesting. If you think about the way that the Jewish temple, right, the Old Covenant temple was laid out, there were divisions all throughout the temple. For example, there was one section that only the high priest can go into, called the Most Holy Place. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, and this is where God's glory and presence dwelt, and this place was called heaven. So the Most Holy Place, where only the high priest could go, was called heaven. There was another section of the temple that only priests could go, which is known as earth. This section of the temple was called the holy place. Gentiles were not allowed in this section. And then there was another outer section called the court of the Gentiles, where, Gentiles could go. This outer section was known as the sea. But Jesus broke down all these temple divisions. So now today there is no more sea in the new heaven and earth, or the new covenant. By the way, I believe the new heaven and earth refers to the new covenant. I believe we today are in the new heaven and earth, or the new covenant era. I don't have time to get into it in this video, but if you're interested, I have a video called The Passing of Heaven and Earth, which shows that we today are living in the new heaven and earth. I'll leave a link to that video in the video notes below if you're interested. But suffice it to say that we today are living in the new heaven and earth, and Jesus has broke down all these divisions that were in the temple. That's why Paul said that in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither free nor slave, there's neither male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. This is Galatians 3, verse 28 to 29. By the way, there was a section of the temple where women were not allowed to go. This was another one of those temple, divisions. But now in Christ, in the new covenant era, this division too has been broken down. That's why Paul said that there is neither male nor female. He's not referring to literally no more males and females. He's referring to these, in Christ, there are no more of these divisions. So that's what he's referring to when he says that there's no more male or female. So today, Christians are all priests, according to 1 Peter 2, verse 9. In fact, Christians can even boldly go into the Holy of Holies, according to Hebrews 10, verse 19, because of the blood of Christ. And this was, again, something that only the high priest could go in the Old Covenant times. And only once a year could the high priest go into the most holy place. But in Christ today, we can boldly enter the most holy place. So there is no more sea today. In other words, the Jew and Gentile divisions were all broken down in Christ. So I think this is what John is referring to when he says that there would be no more sea in the new heaven and earth. Another view of the sea is that it represents the demonic realm. The Jews taught that the sea was symbolic of the demonic realm and was untamable by man. Leviathan, for example, which represents Satan, Leviathan, he came from the sea, according to Isaiah 27, verse 1. So when Messiah came, he bound the strong man, or he bound Satan, according to Matthew 3, verse 27. And he was cast out demons, and you can see this in Matthew 8, verse 16. So Jesus demonstrated his power over the spiritual realm. So today in Christ, there is no more sea. In other words, Jesus has, he has demonstrated his power over all these spiritual things like Satan and demons. In fact, here's something interesting. Matthew 8. If you guys remember when Jesus was in a boat sleeping, right? The weather turned bad all of a sudden. There's wind and rain all around. And his disciples woke him up and, were saying that they were all going to drown. And so Jesus calmed the waves and the sea. And you can read this in Matthew 8, verse 27. So this calming, when Jesus calmed the wind and the rain and everything, this was a sign or the proof that Jesus is Lord over all things, even the demonic realm, which represents, the sea represented the demonic realm. So today in Christ, there's no more sea. So that's another view of this no more sea. Okay, one last view I want to go over is, this is a view I heard from Mike Dooley, a guy who wrote an article about what this no more sea represents. Dooley believes that when Revelation says there was no more sea, the sea is referring to the giant bronze cast metal bull-like laver that the priests washed themselves in before they entered the holy place in the temple. 1 Kings, verse 7 to 23 describes this. And he made a molten sea, 10 cubits from the one brim to the other. It was round all about, and its height was 5 cubits. And the line of 30 cubits did it compassed all around it. So in other words, it was 30 cubits around it. 2 Chronicles 4 verse 1-3 also talks about this in a description of the furnishings of the temple. The chronicler said, "Then he made a bronze altar, 20 cubits in length, 20 cubits in width, and 10 cubits in height. He also made the sea of cast metal, 10 cubits from brim to brim, circular in form, and its height was 5 cubits, and its circumference was 30 cubits. Now figures like oxen were under it and all around it, 10 cubits, entirely encircling the sea. The oxen were in 2 rows, cast in one place." So the chronicler talked about the sea, right? This was a giant basin-like thing. This is where the priests, they washed themselves before they went into the holy place. Hebrews 9 verse 10 also mentions diverse washings, which probably refers to the sea. So when Revelation says that in the new heaven and earth there would be no more sea, some commentators say that this is what it is referring to. Since there's no longer a physical temple in the new covenant era or in the new heaven and earth era, then there's no more need for this ritual washing. So there's no more sea either. So that's what some commentators, that's what Mike Dooley believes that this is referring to. I'm not set on this, I'm not sure about this, but it seems to make sense to me. So anyway, these are some possibilities of what the no more sea refers to. As I stated above, there may be some truth to more than one of these views. Revelation doesn't really tell us what it's referring to. It just says that in the new heaven and earth there would be no more sea. So anyway, those are some possibilities about what no more sea refers to. Let me know which one you guys think is makes more sense, and maybe you have another view that I haven't heard of, so let me know that too. I'm open to hearing new thoughts about that too. So anyway, that is it for today. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please do me a huge favor, hit the like button. Also, if you want to be notified of new videos, hit the subscribe button. And for a more detailed discussion of the topics discussed in this video, especially about the new heaven and earth and the new covenant era, check out my book called The End is Here, How the New Testament's Prophecies Were Fulfilled. I go into much more detail about these topics. I also go into all kinds of other end times related topics, such as the second coming, the resurrection, Jesus coming in flaming fire, and a bunch more of topics, end time related topics. I also have an entire chapter in the book of Revelation too. So if you're interested in eschatology and end times type stuff, check out my book. It is available on Amazon. By the way, I also have a bunch of free articles and videos on the website, thebiblefulfilled.com, so you can check that out too if you're interested. All that stuff is free. So if you're interested, go to thebiblefulfilled.com. All right, so thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time.